Okay, we're live. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. With us today is Gary Sowinski of Southern California PGA and Eric Evans, also of the Southern California PGA. And, you know, part of my reason for doing these Zooms was I just kind of loosely titled it Game Changers. And what came to mind is Manuel de la Torre. I think a game changer in the game of golf over, a long time, 50 plus years, 80 years really. But 50 years as far as I could see. And both of you guys came to mind, having had a much longer relationship with him than I have had. Gary, I don't know much about your relationship. Hope to find out about that today. Eric dragged me to a few seminars down at Moon Valley in Phoenix. Is right, Moon Valley, is that correct, Eric?
Yes.
Yeah, many years ago. And so so that's what kind of was ruminating in my head. And so what I want to do first is just talk a little bit about you two, even though we're not here, but some people may or may not know you. And I think it's important that people get to know you and how your life was formed a little bit, or your relationship or your golf game was formed by your relationship with Manuel. Gary, I'm going to start with you. You are 67 years young, or 68, am I wrong? I think it's 67 years, 68 on 9/13. Yep. And Eric, 526 here. Happy birthday in a couple days.
Oh, thanks.
But Gary, you've had quite a playing career, particularly in the last several years. You seem to pop up on the leaderboard just about every time you tee it up. You have a knack for shooting some pretty low scores. I was going through the Blue Golf, and we've got right around just slightly above 71.7 stroke average for about the last 5 or 6 years. And you do play a lot of golf. You know, you get in probably 40 to 50 tournament rounds a year in the section. That's a fair amount, and that's a pretty active playing schedule. And it seems to be worthwhile. You play awfully well. Last year, if people don't know, I mean, at my site, you qualified for the U.S. Senior Open. You've done that on how many occasions? 2 or 3? How many Senior Opens have you played in? Maybe more?
I'm going to guess that it's probably about 10 or 12.
There you go. Okay. So, yeah, you only bring up a few on your website. So you're the modest one. You've been Player of the Year on several occasions in the senior division, I noticed, in the last few years. But where did it start for you? I mean, we know, a lot of us know about your current playing career in recent times. That kind of pops up on everybody's radar. Probably, for us PGA fellows, that's for sure. I've been to a couple national stroke plays, and there you are. So where did it all start for you? I mean, as far as golf.
Well, I was really pretty lucky. I grew up at a country club. My father joined, and that was our family vacation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So
Wow.
We would just play golf all the time through the course of the summer. And then after I had gone to college for a while in the stint in the Army, I wanted to get into the golf business, and a friend of mine who had known Manuel helped me get an interview with him, and I went to work for Manuel in 1974 and worked with him all the way through 1981. And he was a total, I'm going to say, career-changing type person.
Yeah, there's a complete package, right?
He was the best person I had ever known in the industry.
Right. So you're from a tournament standpoint, you're certainly not Eric and I, we grow up with, these giants of the game as junior golfers, as guys you just call up and say, hey, Mark O'Meara, do you want to go play 18 down at Mission Viejo or whatever, John Cook, But that wasn't your story. You kind of dabbled around in some other things. And I always say to people, golf's a long journey, it can be. And you've certainly shown that by great example, and you continue to play so well. But so when do you start teeing it up and entering tournaments? Was that right away after you went to work for Manuel, or?
No, when I worked for Manuel, I only played a few because I spent the majority of my time with him. And I'm going to tell you, learning how to hit shots, learning how to do different things, a tremendous amount of time working with him, just understanding the golf swing.
Yeah.
and then after I left him and kind of got my own job, I worked for Club Corp for a long time. And fortunately, they wanted you to be a business person. So I ended up being a regional golf director with them and ran, at one time, I think I ran 11 clubs for them, and then just burned out.
Yeah, was Bob Husband with Club Corp at that time, or
no? No, Bob Husband actually had sold, I think it was Heritage Golf.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And he had sold that to Club Corp and American Golf.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Bob had my apprentice job prior to me working for Eddie Marin's, which I was lucky to work for. So you come to Manuel, and I want to get to that about Manuel, which and doing my research, I found awfully interesting. The breadth of his relationship to the game is truly amazing. I mean, I know him as a great instructor and a coach. I also knew of his playing capabilities. I didn't know that he also gave seminars on how to run your golf shop and how to do everything. I mean, he was the complete package, and obviously that was where your first experience was doing that, right? Although you were learning a lot about the golf swing. So you start playing at what time? I mean, I saw where you first won the Wisconsin PGA in '85 or '6. Was that one of your first?
Probably about that, yes.
Yeah, one of your first big wins as a golf, which is a major achievement as a golf professional to win your section championship. That's quite an achievement, and a long, rich history in Wisconsin for golf. And then that zooms forward. I saw you did some clinics with Manuel in Texas at a club down there at some point.
Right. I had him come down when I was working in Texas, and he would come down every year, and we would put on a 5 or 7 day clinic for the members. And it was, how I never lost my relationship with him. I used to have him do that. I used to talk with him on the phone probably, and I'll say at least once a month, about golf swings, problems, things of that nature.
Sure.
Just learning how to improve my teaching ability.
Yeah, that's something I hope we get back to a little bit, is how golf, I think that was one of his strengths, but how as us golf professionals or golfers in general, and ironically, even with better players, we can kind of get astray and lose our way a little bit.
Well, I can tell you this about Manuel, which is, I always was amazed by it. Every morning at 7:45, his car pulled into the parking lot. He went into the kitchen. He had 2 pieces of toast and a cup of coffee. Immediately stopped in the golf shop, dropped off his briefcase where our information was. So we all knew where to get the information. He went to the lesson tee. He was there from 8 until 11. Came in at 11, returned phone calls, checked in with us, had lunch. His next lesson started at 11:30. He taught until 5 p.m. Came in at 5 p.m., returned phone calls, had dinner, went back to teach from 5:30 to 6:30, and then at 6:30 is when he would teach non-members and us and tour players. And he was there until dark, and then went home and did his book work.
By the way, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Dark is kind of late in Wisconsin during the summer.
It was 9 or 9:30 at night when we would finish watching him teach, and he would be heading home to do his, the daily receipts and do all of his paperwork or correspondence that needed to be done. And that was before email. So he actually wrote letters and then put envelopes and did all of that.
The lost art, letter writing. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so that brings us to Eric Evans. Eric and I, just for full disclosure here, we go back quite a few years in Southern California as junior golfers, and kind of played a little bit collegiately against each other. Eric, I'll let him tell the story. Eric, you start playing golf in Southern California at a pretty young age, and you have some success quite early on in your junior golf career, correct?
I did, yes. I started playing golf when I was 9. Well, I started playing tournament golf when I was 9. I started when I was 8 when my dad took up the game, and then I got interested, and there was tournament. This was like in October of '68, and then in '69, Junior golf started in June, I think. It was the whole summer. And my first golf tournament was when I was 9, and I just loved it. So that's it. I just want to play golf. And I did. I had some success, played junior tournaments, all just local PGA junior tournaments. And did have some success.
Well, I remember 62 you shot one time in a junior event. That's pretty low. I don't know how much, if we can call that success. I think it was the LA City Junior Championship fired a little 62 to open the day, I think. So that was pretty strong.
Yeah,
and that led you to where? Oklahoma State, right? I mean,
yes.
Did you get to the finals of the National Junior or the semis? Or did you?
Semis.
Semifinals,
yeah.
Yeah, and you lost to who?
David Gaines.
Who eventually?
Went to Stanford. And
yeah.
He was the great, I mean, it's funny because the 3 of the 4 semifinalists at the U.S. Junior that year, 3 of them were from Southern California, and then 1 was Willie Wood. And Willie Wood ended up winning. I lost to David Gaines in the semis, and Willie beat Corey Pavin, who was junior golf. I played junior golf with. He lost to Willie 1-up, and then Willie beat David Gaines in the finals.
So Willie won the national. Is that where you were kind of recruited at Oklahoma State? Was that sort of the start of that process, or no? By coach?
No, I don't know that I was I didn't know that I was on the radar of. I got recruited by Houston, University of Houston, Ohio State, because the U.S. Junior was at Ohio State, and the local schools, USC and UCLA. But I wanted to get away from California and see how things were somewhere else. And so I was all ready to go to Houston. I verbally committed to go to Houston. I hadn't heard from Oklahoma State. And then Coach Holder called me, and he says, well, come on out for a
visit
trip. And I did, and I loved the place. And then I was in a quandary about going to Houston. And then David Williams got sick. And then he said he didn't know whether he was going to be able to to coach the team.
Yeah.
This year when I'd be a freshman. He says, if I wanted to get out of the verbal commitment, I could. So I said, well, okay. And so then I ended up at Oklahoma State.
So those are some 2 interesting teams. I know Houston at that point had a guy named Freddie Couples hanging around and a couple other great players. And then at Oklahoma State, you had Tway. And you had Willie Wood and the Rafael Alacon, and there's a whole host of other guys that in their own right were fantastic players. And you won 2 national championships while you were on that team, or just 1?
We won 1 in 1980 when I was a sophomore, and 2nd in 79, and I think 3rd in 81.
Yeah. I was there at the 1 in 80. That was some great golf. And then so then you get out of college and you go to work, right? A little bit. You played a little bit of mini tours, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. We were in South Africa together. We also spent some time in Canada together. You played a little bit on the mini tours, but you also kind of worked along that same time. Did you a little bit, or no? It was all play, or you were working?
No.
At a club?
Yeah, pretty much out of college. I started working first place. I was for about 6 months, Sunset Hills out in Westlake Village area out there. And then I went to Mountain Gate, and I was at Mountain Gate for 7 years under Mike Miller.
Yeah.
And Mike Miller was the one that got me interested first in Ernest Jones. And then from Ernest Jones, I found out about Manuel, and then
here we are today. So
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. So
that Mike got me. We used to play golf pretty much every day, the head pro, and I'd watch him, and his philosophy was just, I'd never heard of Ernest Jones at that point, and the stuff he was telling me, it was so simple that I thought, well, wow,
this makes sense, huh?
Yeah, it was just, it couldn't get any easier.
And so now, okay, so we know who you guys are, and the point of this is Manuel, and I'm going to do my little thing because I want viewers and people that may listen to this to know a little bit about the man. Of course, you can go to Wikipedia and find a couple pages, but I've read 2 of his books, or his one book that I know of, and then another book written by, was it Hayes or is that John?
Yeah, John Hayes.
Yeah. And of course, I've attended a couple of his clinics. But Eric, here's something you might find interesting. So Manuel, born in 1921, comes to the United States in what year, guys? Anybody know this? This is great.
Well, if it would have to be, I can tell you, it was the last ship that left the port of Spain before the breakout of the Spanish Civil War.
Right. So he ends up in Pasadena, California, where I ended up living most of where I was raised, and not far from where Eric was raised. At some point, he and his family end up in Pasadena, California after they get to the United States, and he gets a job. His dad, Manuel, knows a golf professional at Brookside Golf Course in Pasadena. And this man ends up leading him to Milwaukee, not too far after that. But
well,
that was
their first stop in New York.
Yeah, right, of course. And somehow they end up at Brookside of all the weird places, which is, of course, I grew up playing. And then he ends up in New York, and then that's where the relationship with Ernest Jones starts. But we'll get to that in a minute. So he attends North, and you know, in this time he's raised by his father, who's a preeminent golf professional, right? But some people may not know Manuel Sr. was Spanish Open winner 5 or 6 times, a fantastic player, a club professional in Madrid. Manuel's on several national magazines and pictures as a 3-4-year-old swinging a club. By the way, it looked darn rock solid at 5 or 6. I'm just going to tell you, it looks fantastic. I don't know if you've ever seen the images, but they're great. And you know, and time goes by. He learns. You know, he talks about his tutelage from his father over the years, and especially those early days. He goes to Northwestern. He in I think right around right around 40. I think or maybe 41, or 42, and he finishes second in the NCAAs, and I guess eventually goes in the military at this point, because I kind of lose track of him at that point. Gets out of the military. At that point, I lose a little track of what he does, but all of a sudden he shows back up again, playing on some PGA Tour events, has a second, has a third in the early 50s, and then quickly accepts the job at Milwaukee Country Club. And
1952.
1952, right? And from then, you know, from there, it's just fascinating to me. If you look, the breadth of the tournament competition, which he's highly efficient at. And by the way, something, you know, Gary, you have in common maybe with Manuel, not that he was, I think, any less of a player as a young man, but he certainly played great as he got older. You know, it was like, I don't know what that was all about, other than maybe we could talk about his method of teaching, but he certainly had a great career once he turned 50. I mean, he won a couple national senior opens, won one, and I think he lost in the playoff. He wins every section championship. He wins the state open 5 or 6 times, the section 5 or 6 times. And he does this over like a 25-year period. It's not like he wins one in 52, then he turns around and wins one in 68 or 9 or 70. You know, it's not like he was doing this just consecutively back to back. So there's this tremendous playing career. And then he starts, you know, at some point right around the late 60s, he starts doing more clinics, I noticed. He starts the bandwidth gets a little larger for Manuel than just, like you mentioned, this regimented, very committed professional club job, where he's able to kind of go out and share his expertise in the PGA. And then he starts getting awards, you know, all the Strauss, all the other awards that are out there. He does, the clinics are amazing all over. And in fact, they're not just about hitting a golf ball and playing golf. They're also about running your business for his fellow professionals. So not only is he serving the public to help them get better, but he's serving his fellow professionals for them to run their life better, to run their profession better, and to be better instructors. And I think that's where I'd kind of like to stop talking about him just in that respect. And then I want you to chime in and maybe share some of your experiences with him. And I had a few notes here that I was just I think the big question is, to me, you know, what drove this Manuel De La Torre to do what he has done? I mean, it certainly, you know, he's a Hall of Famer in both the National and America as an instructor, in the World Golf Hall of Fame and National PGA. He's a Hall of Fame instructor. He would probably be in the Hall of Fame as a PGA player, and if they have that, he probably is for sure there too. So What do you think drove him, Gary? You were around him quite a bit. What do you think drove that?
His passion for teaching and watching people get better.
Yeah.
You know, you had to watch him teach to truly appreciate how much he cared about each student and their ability to enjoy the game, and his passion to communicate what they were doing and understanding it.
Right. Was that something that he got from his father that you know of, or was it a mutual type thing, or is it something that was kind of part of his?
Well, I think it was attributed a lot to his father. You know, when you said earlier about him, finishing second in the NCAAs, Manuel would tell the story that when he came back from the NCAAs, he had told his father he would have won, except he duck hooked some drives. So his dad said, well, go down to the range and we'll take a look. Quick story, Manuel said he had hit some drives and they were all dead straight. He saw his father getting close to him and he hit a duck hook. He said he turned to his dad, said, what did I do? His dad said, why? Do you want to do it again? Turned around and left Manuel standing on the range. Manuel said a couple days later is the first time his father talked to him, and his father told him, he said, when you do it correctly, focus only on that and spend the rest of your life trying to perfect that.
Yeah, and
I think that's what instilled in him a lot of his passion to teach and his desire to really commit 100% to each student.
Yeah, I certainly experienced that in my brief time with them. Eric, do you have anything to chime in from that standpoint? I mean, as far as from your experience, did you see anything, or did you feel anything, or knowledge of what the drive in the man? I mean, when he did those teaching clinics for us in Arizona, I mean, that was a big day. I mean, it started early, and we were sitting around the table at 8 o'clock at night talking about golf still, for the cronies that wanted to hang out there. And he was doing that, that was in the early 2000s, Eric. Was that late 90s? Late 90s?
Late 90s, yeah.
Late 90s. So, he was 75-ish, 74, 5-ish doing that. That's a big commitment, a big day, he was on it.
Yeah. I think, what I could get out of it, I agree with everything that Gary says. I saw that with Manuel quite a bit. But I think he found that the principles that Ernest Jones had and his dad had, I think he really saw that there was such a benefit to have people learn golf that way. And I think he felt some feeling that it was up to him, kind of in the torch, to where he could really make a difference in this game. I think that's what he really wanted to do. And so I think if he didn't take the ball up, as they say, I think it might have, because there wasn't too many people that were teaching that method. It was
right.
So he
was always baffled by that, by the way. I read in different magazines and things that I picked up over the last several weeks. He was always baffled why more people didn't follow his lead with this instruction, because it did work and it was very successful for him, and it seemed to make so much sense, and the people that did learn it seemed to make sense. Why it didn't catch on more? I guess they needed more advertising, more marketing. It didn't make the golf ball go farther, right, guys? Yeah, we'll talk about that distance thing, because that was one of my lessons with Manuel, was distance. So, okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, the resonation, he fed off that. He fed off. I think he seemed to feed off his success a little bit, and that's not an uncommon thing, but a great thing, because you can see. I mean, when I went to those clinics, it was miraculous what he did with people in 15 minutes sometimes. I mean, it was like, okay, now the person's going to leave the tee and walk on water. Oh, I believe it. It's going to happen, right? I mean, it would take beginning golfers or people that had a problem, and it would just evaporate, right? So,
well, if I could, the greatest thing that I saw that he could do for people was he could take them, and they felt like that he would be able to, whatever he asked them to do, he would stay on that, and he would get them to just get it. And it was amazing how he knew right where to go with each person that he seemed to come up with, or who people who would come up to him, and he would just, it just seems like we'd sit around and we watch and we'd be thinking to one another, you know, what do we think we'd work on this guy and everything like that. And whatever he would pick seemed to be, well, of course, that's what should have been picked. And that came just from him doing it so much.
Yeah.
Times he had the great eye and he knew what to.
And that brings me to the next question is, you know, what made Manuel such a unique and successful coach, teacher, and player? I mean, let me back up here because it's something I didn't mention enough. I think for those that may not know who Manuel De La Torre is or know him that well, I think most golf professionals would know who he is on some level, or at least a lot of them. But it starts with Ernest Jones to some extent, right? This swing the club head theory that Ernest Jones, that his father forms this relationship with Ernest Jones, and this becomes a nucleus for the three of them over the next many years. Ernest, Manuel, his young son, and then Manuel and his son carry on this tradition of, you know, swing the club head, which Manuel at some point alters just a little bit. We'll talk about that at some point. He alters that concept just a little bit, seeing some problems there with hand motion rather than club, kind of refocusing on club. But what do you think made him so successful? You know, we just talked about he's got a big drive and a big desire. Gary, I mean, did you see any particular, what for you, from your perspective, what was that, where was that success? I mean, well, obviously.
I would always ask him when I would spend from 6:30 at night when we got finished working until 9:30 sitting there watching him teach. And when we would go into the shop afterwards and he was packing up, I would always ask him different questions, and we would sometimes sit in there till 10:30, 11 at night. And one time I'd ask him, I said, Manuel, how do you always know what to do? And he said, well, all you have to learn to do is watch the club. And the club will tell you what they do, and you have to get the club moving correctly. So he would say, well, the person that we just worked with, he said, look at how that club was at the top of their backswing. So I said, well, I showed him what it looked like. He goes, now, how did they get there? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, now you move the club until you can get it into the position that they did. And that's going to tell you what they did. And now you have to show them how to change that club's movement. And he was always so good at that. His eye is better than any teacher today who uses video.
Right. I saw that too a little bit in the clinics that he gave. It was pretty stupendous. So I guess we come now to another question. This is a very broad question, but I'm gonna start with Eric first. So you have this interlude at Mountain Gate, and you heard of Ernest Jones. How did you end up with Manuel, Eric? How did that come about? And then I got to ask the question is how did Manuel, in what reflected, how did it, because I know it did change your game. I know it changed the way you thought about golf because I've known you for such a long time. And how did that affect you? So first, how did you get to know Manuel? Because we didn't quite get all the way there. And then how did that change your relationship to golf, your career, your playing, et cetera, your teaching, your coaching? How did that change for you? First of all, how did you get to know Manuel? How did you end up?
Well, I got started looking around. I found some stuff on Ernest Jones, and then I got a magazine. It was Golf Illustrated. I think it was some early 1996, and they had what was called Teacher Talk. And in that magazine, they had an interview with Manuel, and I knew a little bit about Manuel, not a lot, because I was still heard a lot more about Ernest Jones, and I hadn't heard all that much about Manuel. So I saw this magazine, I read the article, and he got on my radar type of a thing. And so then I still didn't know what, just kind of, that was all I got out of it. And then I went to the I think it was 98 or 7 PGA show in Vegas. And he was giving a seminar one of the seminars before the big merchandise convention and whatnot. So I saw him there for, I think it was like a 2-hour deal for the PGA. And then afterwards, I went up to him and I told him my story and everything like that and how I'd like to get more involved. And he says, well, we do these every October in Phoenix. He has seminars where he just has pros, and I can get a hold of, he gave me somebody to get a hold of. And then that's how I started really getting involved with manuals. I started, I think in '98 was the first seminar I went to at Moon Valley there in Phoenix. And I went every year, I think, until he stopped, which was around 2011 or 12, I think. So that's how, then once I got to be able to listen to him more and more and more. And the amazing thing about it, John and Gary, was I did it every time. So you think, well, what else can the guy say, right? But every time I went, I learned something completely that just shook my world, because he might have said something, he was going over the same type of situation or problem with a student, but he would say it in a completely different way, which would open up, the window of, oh, that's pretty amazing. I remember turning to a lot of guys around me and I go, that is just amazing how he could just clarify it that easily. And it seems so easy for him to do it.
So folks, I want anybody that's listening to this, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to play with either one of these gentlemen on a golf course, but I have. And what they do on a golf course is pretty amazing. So for them to say that this guy is revealing, I mean, you guys are masters of what you do with the golf club in your hand. For you, somebody to make something simple very quickly and give you a new perspective on it and have it resonate, because we hear a lot of things as golf professionals, right? And most of it doesn't resonate. It just tumbles right out the door in like 3.5 seconds. But like you said, here's Manuel telling you something and you're going, oh, right? And so how does that affect you as a professional going forward? I mean, when you're instructing and teaching, did it energize you to go out and share that information with others? And
Oh, absolutely. Because I think it felt like I could finally have a little bit more confidence in what I was doing.
right,
I was like most pros that weren't as, well, I've got this idea and I really know what can help people and everything like that. I was going from different thing to different thing to different thing to try to figure out the best way to do something. And then this hit me and I go, well, that's the easiest way that you can get somebody to improve playing golf, making their golf swing. So so yeah, to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. It just made me, I felt more at ease giving lessons after that, because it just seemed like I was telling people stuff that this is going to help them. And it's easy they don't have to walk away and think, God, I don't know if I can ever do that. I thought I was getting to the point where they were starting to, that seems easy. And it was.
you said something there, Eric, which I'm going to transition to Gary here, because on Gary's website, he says, hey, if this lesson doesn't work, it's free. It's on me. If I don't make you better, it's on me. And that kind of, that confidence of what Manuel taught, I think, and I don't think that Gary's given away his time very often, quite frankly.
Never.
Nor never. Exactly. So you have this breadth of relationship that spans, your young adulthood and extends many, many years. And you're a consummate golf professional in your own right. I know it's hard to answer that question, but is there any way you can kind of address it? Like, obviously you've become a golf professional and very good in many ways, similar to Manuel as an instructor and as a player. Inspiring, right? I mean, how do you answer that question? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, having worked with him and spending time with him and always seeing the improvement, when I was allowed to teach and Manuel would watch lessons and we would talk about it, he would always show me what I could have done. And what I learned was very much, Manuel was what he called, and we called him, the concept master. And the thing that he stressed is, if you never deviate from the concept, you will never fail. And the concept is based on physics. And so many of the things that he taught were based on that kind of a relationship. So everything made sense. And then in order to teach people that, it makes sense to the student. when you tell a student, if you want the ball to go to that flag stick and you swing the golf club in that direction, the ball should go there.
Right.
Well, Manuel would say, now, why does somebody tell you to hit down? If you hit down on something, what direction is the ball going to go? So he taught you that. And when you teach that to students, everything they do instantly changes.
Right. I agree with you on the concept, and I'm going to hopefully in a few moments bring up each maybe, and let's do that now. I mean, you guys have an illuminating moment, maybe one or two that, Gary, let's start with you, an illuminating moment that, oh, that was unbelievable. You know, like that was a game changer. I know there was probably thousands of game changers with the guy. I mean, I had a lot of those experiences with a couple of professionals in my life. Eddie Marins is one of them. Greg McHatton's another one. There are people that are game changers that tend to change our perspective on things and illuminate us. But can you share with Manuel what a couple of those moments might have been for you?
Yeah, there were lots of them, but some of the best ones were when I would watch him teach somebody.
Mm-hmm.
He had a student one day, and he said to them, he said, well, you have a child, and the person replied yes. And he said, if you were going to teach them how to turn an egg over, what would you do? And the person said, well, I would tell them to take the spatula, slide it under the egg, and turn it over. And Manuel said to them very calmly, he goes, well, why didn't you tell them to lift your shoulder, move your elbow, raise your arm, and turn your hip? And the person just was kind of flabbergasted, said, what do you mean? He goes, well, when you came here, when I asked you what you were trying to do, he said, you gave me 100 things you were trying to do, but never once did you mention the club.
Right.
And then when I would watch Manuel teach, when he would teach like Carol Mann, and he taught a couple men on the tour, and one of the guys on the tour, I'll never forget, and I don't want to mention his name because I don't want anybody to be embarrassed, but Manuel asked him, he said, what are you trying to do? And he said, well, in the backswing, I'm trying to make my left knee point behind the ball and my left shoulder point behind the ball. At the top of the backswing, he said, when I change direction, I'm trying to make my left hip go backwards, drive my right knee and elbow at the ball, and then spin out of it. So Manuel took the club out of his hand and said, go ahead and hit a couple for me. The player reached for the club and Manuel moved it behind his back to the other side. Well, the player then reached to that side. Well, Manuel moved it behind his back to the other side. Finally, the player said, Manuel, can I have the club? And the player said to him, Manuel said, certainly, I'll give you the club. But he said, when you told me what you did, never once did you mention it. He goes, I assumed you didn't need it.
Right.
And then the player said to him, tell me what you want me to do. That to me changed part of my, I'll say, understanding of what he was doing. He was making everybody understand the club was the highest priority and the body only followed that.
Absolutely.
And you see it today in many, many golf swings. I mean, you look at the movement of, and I'll just say Adam Scott, and then you look at the movement of John Rahm, and you look at the movement of Jim Furyk. What are they doing? Each one is moving the golf club the way they move the club, but none of those three players' bodies move the same way. But they make the club do the job.
Absolutely. Eric, how about for you? Any illuminating moment for you that kind of was like, like something that just made your shift a little bit, or has lasted to this day pretty clearly? You know, I mean.
Well, there were so many of them that
Yeah, right.
But going to those seminars, I'd see him do different things, and the one thing that really stands out to me among many was I remember one time he was teaching, somebody brought out like about a 4-year-old child that had never played golf before. And Manuel, this is when he's probably in his early 80s. He gets down, close to the ground as he can. And everybody kind of crowds around because I want to hear what he's going to say to this little kid. This kid was just glued to Manuel. Just anything that Manuel said, the kid was. So Manuel put the club behind the ball, grabbed the club, put his hand about 2 feet in front of it, and he moved the club for the boy. And he says, I just want you to roll that. And so he'd make him roll it into the thing like this, just into his hand. And so then he have the kid do it. He says, just roll it into my hand. So the kid was rolling in the hand. And then now Manuel said, so when he was doing that, he was sitting in the middle of the ball. And now Manuel says, I want you to do that same thing. Now I just want you to brush the ground. And the kid just brushed the ground. The ball just popped straight up. So he got down there and he gave him an idea. That's what Manuel was so good at, that I thought is he kind of show you a way that would change your idea of what you thought you were supposed to do. And then once you did that, you'd see so many expressions on these people's faces like, oh my God, I got that now. And that's for an instructor is unbelievable, is when the light goes off for somebody where the understanding is there. So I saw that a lot with Manuel, and with that little boy, it was just amazing because he didn't tell him to take it back far. I didn't tell him to do anything like this. But then once he could do that, and the great thing about beginners was, because everybody takes the club back crazy and everything like that. Well, he just tell him to swing it back, put it on your shoulder, turn the club back to the ground, brush the ground, then put it on your other shoulder. He said that's just the shape of the swing now. So everybody knows where their shoulder is. So people aren't taking over their head now. They're not ripping it around the back. So it's just, and so then he'd say, well, once you can get them to put it on their shoulder, brush, and then put it on their other shoulder, just say, well, can you get it above the shoulder? Same direction.
That simpleness of concept. I know my one experience at one of the clinics, he'd offer his time to some of the instructors during these clinics to get a lesson. And I quickly stepped in. And, Eric's known me for a long time. I'm a bit of a shadow boxer around the golf course. Don't hit it too far. But I've had some pretty good results over the years from time to time. So what would you like to learn today? Well, isn't that a great way to start a lesson, right? Just there, what would you like to better understand or learn today, right? What is I'm observing you. You've got my attention. What are we going to try to accomplish together here? Good way to start a lesson, huh? And I said, well, I over the years, I feel I tend to lose a lot of ground on par fives in tournaments. Subtly saying I don't hit it far enough, right? So he goes, well, hit a few shots for me and pick out a target. And I lace a couple right at the target. And he goes, and then I hit a couple more. He goes, so you got a wedge? And I go, yeah. What's your favorite wedge? Whatever it was. I grabbed it, picked out a target, maybe 40, 50 yards away. He goes, can you hit it there? So there was a target out there, and I'm very close to hit it there. And he goes, can you move it in a little bit closer? And I hit it right at that target. He goes, there's no reason you should be giving up anything. He says, you play within the ability that you have, and don't worry about it. That's your game. You're going to beat him with your game. You're not going to beat him with your distance. And it was like, and I grew up with a guy that was pretty good at that. You mentioned him earlier, Corey Pave, and he certainly had a pretty good career of doing that. And so it was a big relief suddenly to think, oh yeah, I really don't need all that extra stuff. I just need to manage my ball more efficiently around this golf course and play within my own ability. My ability to hit at a certain distance, he informed me during this lesson, was my ability to hit at that distance. I probably wasn't going to massively change that. I could try to swing faster, but within my own confines, could I still hit it solidly? That's what I was trying. And he said that would change in the early part of the week in a tournament, or later in the week, it might change. But you need to play within whatever that ability was. And that was a reassuring. I kind of knew that, but it was like, oh, okay, it's okay, right? And the other one was I was hitting steep on the ball, and he brought out a piece of plywood. And I thump it a few times, and he scraped it with the club. Can you make that sound on it? 3 balls later, I wasn't steep anymore, right? I mean, it was like, boom, here I go, So, there was a vision. It was a very visceral moment for me, right? He didn't give me 40 different instructions how to shallow it out and dip my right hip. He says, hey, can you make a few practice swings, scrape that thing across that board, right? And so suddenly that's what I was doing. So those were illuminating. I think we've all had those moments with them, and you gentlemen have obviously had more. I got a few quotes here, and I think they're somewhat interesting, as most of his quotes are. But I haven't tried to make a putt in over 40 years. You know, that's an interesting thing. Gary, could you share with us what that means? As Manuel suggested that to you, what the depth of that was?
Exactly. Manuel was a firm believer that the ball had to roll a certain distance to go into the hole. And you had to pick a line and roll it on that line, stopping it at the hole. If you did that, it had a chance to go in. And I once said, well, shouldn't it always go in then? And he would say, well, how many ball marks, how many footprints, and how many blades of grass are there between where you are and where the hole is that could possibly knock it offline? So he never tried to make anything. And when I was younger, I'd had a problem on, quote, 3-footers. And he basically said to me at that time, he said, don't change your expectations. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, pick your line, roll it on the line, and roll it on that distance. Don't try to hit it in the hole. And that changed my ability to make 3-footers, 5-footers, 2-footers in 10 seconds.
Wow.
I just picked the line, rolled it on that line, and you know what? He goes, 2 things happen. It either goes in or it doesn't.
Yeah, Eric shared with me a story many years ago. He was winning the Wisconsin State Open as probably a senior, or probably pretty close, and he had like a 12 or 15 footer on the last hole, and goes up, marks it, cleans it, steps back, gets over it, and rolls it in. And somebody commented and says, how casual was that? You know? And he says, well, I've done this before. And, you know, to your extent was, I think that was the story, right, Eric? I mean, there was, the gist of it was, you know, like you said, I was either going to make this, or I was either going to make, or I was going to miss. And, you know, I'm just going to go about my intention here to roll the ball with the proper speed on the line that I'm intended, and then be done with it. That's my responsibility. Going in is not my responsibility. I found that to be interesting.
And I think Manuel was also light years ahead of instructors, because he was teaching mental awareness, he was teaching focus, and he was teaching commitment when other instructors had no idea what those things meant. He always said, you've got to visualize what you're going to do. You have to commit to it. He would tell you that this golf club doesn't know who is swinging it. And this golf club will not move if you are just thinking about it. He once said, thought is not action.
I love it.
And too many people can take, because I was on the range with him one day and I hit a shot and I said, and the shot that I had just hit was 40 yards offline compared to the previous one. And I said, I was thinking the same thing. And he looked at me and he goes, Gary, you see the bench over there? And I said, yes. He goes, I'm thinking about going over there to sit down. I looked at him and I said, well, I don't know. He goes, I'm still standing here. My thought was to go sit down, but I never produced the action. He said, you can think the same thing, but you have to produce it. And that made me really understand that there's a commitment and a responsibility that you as a player have to produce the action correctly.
Wow, that's you know, that's so great. I mean, there's another quote here. It's one from Hayes's book. What was the president's name in 1952? Have you ever heard this one?
No.
Oh, this is great. So I think the comment is, the concept here is, it's very important in the words that you use. The words that you use are very important in a lesson. I know that Emmanuel once said, I never give something the student can over practice and make him, that can't make, you know, if I tell him something, he can practice it till the cows come home and he'll get better. I never give him anything that he can practice that's going to make him bad. I never say anything that's going to make him worse. Right. So it came up in a discussion. he asked, they were talking about something and this or that, and a bunch of pros sitting around, and he said, what was the president's name in 1952? And this is in, probably the mid 60s or somewhere, and maybe early 70s, and the gentlemen are all of a certain age, and then Truman, or is it Eisenhower, or is it so-and-so, is it, they couldn't, maybe it was Eisenhower, maybe it was Truman. And I guess it was in the early 90s was the question of when they were discussing this, and they finally came up with this answer. He says, his name was Bill Clinton, and it's still Bill Clinton. Right? What was the president's name in 1952? Well, the president now is named Bill Clinton, and it was Bill Clinton in 1952 as well. So like you said, I mean, I can think about something, but does it change my action? And am I thinking about the right thing? If I'm not thinking about the right thing, we're in trouble. I thought that was pretty profound. But what a wordsmith, right? I mean, he was such a, like you said, he was the champion of content.
I watched him give a lesson to a lady, and he asked her to swing the club around her, to which she said, I can't do that. Manuel said, you can't take the club from the ground around you to the right shoulder and then to your left shoulder. And she looked at him and she goes, well, Manuel, that wouldn't be around me. That would be up and down. So he took his hand and he goes, well, what is this? And she goes, that's around. And he went, what's this? And she said, that's up and down.
Yeah.
So when he would teach her, he changed, and for her only, he changed his terminology. He said, swing the club up to your shoulder and then swing it down. But that was the only time I ever heard him use up and down. And that was because that's what she thought up and down was.
So, well, this has been great, guys. I want to end this one with a quote from Manuel that he talked about his father, and I think is quite important and a great lesson for all of us as golf professionals. He says, one of the parting words of my father was to observe myself.
Mm-hmm.
How powerful is that, right? Just observe ourselves. At the end of the lesson, how was that? On many levels, like you said, it's so far ahead of our time. We're all into this, how to find the spiritual self through meditation. One of the core tenets of meditation is observation, to observe yourself as the person of my thoughts, observe observe me. And so maybe, he was sort of a master in the sense that it was sort of Zen watching him do what he did, right?
Yeah, Manuel was a firm believer that people don't take the responsibility for a bad shot. They blame a swing. But he said your thought and your process and your mind will control that. So if you weren't 100% committed, your shot can't be great. And he said people just go, oh, that was just a bad swing, or I dipped, or I did this. He said they did that because they weren't committed to producing the action. Right. And he never backed off of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The club is an inanimate object. We have control over the club. It's our responsibility to swing that club, right?
Well, and here was the one thing that Manuel got me on as a young person working with him. He asked me if I can make the ball go someplace. And I thought for a second and I said, sure. And he said, how? And I said, well, by moving the club correctly. He said, well, yes, but he goes, understand, you are not making the ball go there. The club is. Mm-hmm. He said, in order for you to make the ball go someplace, you would have to touch it. So he said, you see the importance now. If you want the golf ball to go from point A to point B, you have to move the club correctly. And those are the kinds of things that I stay with today in my own game and with my students. And it's just a huge difference.
Well, thank you. That was sort of a good way to wrap this up, because my last question, or I was going to pose, is if Manuel could say something to you right now, or you could say, what would he tell you? You know, and you kind of said it right there. Observe the club. I mean, how powerful is that as an instructor or a player, just to observe that club? What is it actually doing? And like in his book, Understanding the Golf Swing, one of the first is, what are the ball flight laws? Why did the ball do that? You know, and I'm in control over this club. And it's, and, you know, and for us as players, as we've been at it a few years, it does let you sleep a little easier at night, right? Knowing that you're responsible and that's your deal, and it's going to change from days to day, but it's quite a journey, quite a ride, and it's a lot of fun. And I guess we're all grateful for Manuel de la Torre. And thank you guys for coming here and sharing your time with me. This has been great.
Thank you. It was great.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Okay.
Thank you, John.
I hope to see you guys soon. Maybe we can get out on a golf course together. That'd be great.
That'd be fun.
Okay. Have a great summer, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.